ever feel that feeling of being watched, even when you're all alone? That's exactly what happened to me that night, and I almost didn't live to tell it. Get ready for a story that will send chills down your spine. Before you continue, subscribe to the channel. Like and share your experience in the comments. Have you also experienced something inexplicable? Wembley never sleeps. Even when the clock strikes 3 in the morning, the city whispers with sounds that only insomniacs hear. The echo of lonely footsteps, the distant roar of engines, and that cold wind that seems to glide through the streets like a warning. I shouldn't have been on the A406 at that time. It was a stupid decision, but, you know, sometimes you just want to drive aimlessly, escape your own thoughts. The asphalt was wet from the persistent drizzle that seemed to have been falling for hours, reflecting the yellow lights of the road lamps like bright, restless eyes. There was something disconcerting about the silence that night. It's hard to explain, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that weighs heavily on your chest, that makes you look in the rearview mirror more than necessary. As I passed through a section of construction with orange cones marking the path like a maze, I felt a kind of tingling on the back of my neck. Have you ever had that feeling that you are being watched? I didn't see any cars behind me, but the air felt thick, like something was wrong. It was then that I noticed, in the distance on the side of the road, a figure. At first, I thought he was a construction worker. The reflective vest glistened in the streetlights. But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't moving. He didn't gesture. Just, he was there, standing still, with his back to me, with a rigid, almost unnatural posture. I reduced the speed. My heart started to beat faster, and yet I couldn't take my eyes off him. Something inside me told me to move forward, not stop, ignore it. But, against all common sense, my curiosity won. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. The drizzle increased, and the sound of the drops on the roof of the car seemed amplified. The man was still there, motionless. I picked up my cell phone, but the screen flickered at 3% battery. Of course, when I needed it most, technology let me down. I opened the door slowly, feeling the damp air envelope my face. There was no one else on the road other than the two of us. Every step I took towards him seemed to echo. Even in the drizzle, the distance between us was decreasing, and it was then that I noticed something that froze my blood. The man had no visible legs. Below the reflective vest, where his pants and boots should have been, there was only a dense shadow, which blended into the ground as if it were part of it. My throat went dry, and I took a step back. It was at that moment that he began to turn. When his face was revealed, the air felt heavy, as if the night itself was holding its breath. It was no ordinary face. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and the eyes, my God, the eyes! They were black pits, without iris or shine, like windows open to a place where light had never touched. I swallowed hard, and for a moment I felt my legs wanting to give way. He didn't speak. It didn't move. He just watched me, his head tilting slightly to the side, as if studying me. I tried to take another step back, but I tripped over something that wasn't there before. A small pile of wet earth had appeared right behind me. Instinct told me to run, but my body didn't obey. It was as if his gaze held me, took away any control from me. The feeling of being watched had turned into something worse, an almost physical certainty that he was inside my head, searching my memories, my most intimate fears. That's when he opened his mouth, not to talk, but to smile. A smile that stretched in the wrong way, the corners of the lips reaching almost to the ears, revealing thin, pointed teeth like ivory needles. The image was so absurd that my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the play of lights, a strange reflection in the drizzle. But deep down, I knew this was real. With a force that seemed to come from nowhere, I managed to move. I stumbled again as I backed away, but I didn't allow myself to fall. I turned my body and ran back to the car, adrenaline pumping through every cell. As I ran, I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, but firm, measured. I didn't need to look to know he was coming my way. I reached the car, pulled the door hard and closed it, almost ripping off the handle. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a while to find the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared, and I stepped on the gas without thinking twice. The reflection in the rearview mirror showed me the empty road, no sign of him. My shoulders sagged with relief for a moment, but when I looked at the passenger seat, I felt my heart race again. Something was there. Not him, but a plastic bag. Small, white, tied in a perfect knot. My fingers hesitated before touching the bag. She was damp, cold, and seemed to pulse almost imperceptibly, as if something alive was inside her. With my stomach churning, I untied the knot. Inside was a handful of dark dirt and a single photograph. The image was blurry, but I could recognize two figures, me and him. We were side by side like old friends, and that impossible smile was on his face. The road in front of me seemed darker now, as if the streetlights had gone out. The radio, which had been silent until then, crackled, and a hoarse voice broke out. "You shouldn't have stopped." When I woke up, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my feet touching the cold floor. The light coming from the window seemed paler, almost dull, as if the morning had lost its enthusiasm. The clock on the wall showed 6:17, the same time as when I had heard the first sound coming from the hallway. Something was wrong. My breathing felt heavy, as if the air inside the apartment had become thicker. The plastic bag was still on the floor, intact. But there was something different about it. The contour in the plastic was more defined, almost grotesque. I wanted to open up and end this mystery, but something inside me screamed not to do that. I walked to the kitchen, desperately needing a coffee to clear my head. As the coffee pot lazily dripped, the sound of boiling water seemed to echo louder than it should have. The silence in the rest of the apartment was suffocating, heavy as a wet blanket. It was then that I noticed the lights were blinking, but in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't intermittent, like a common electrical problem. They seemed to flash in patterns, almost like a code. I stood still watching, trying to decipher that enigma. 1, 2, 3 quick blinks, a pause, then a long blink. It was repeated. Again and again, the bag was behind me, but I could feel its presence, as if it had taken on a life of its own. Every time I looked over my shoulder, she seemed closer, even though she was in the same place. Something in the apartment had changed. Not just the environment, but the atmosphere itself. It was as if I had crossed over to another place without realizing it. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed, again coming from the corridor. It wasn't a distant sound. This time it seemed to be right outside the apartment. The sound was methodical, steady, as if someone was waiting to be noticed. My heart began to beat wildly, and my hands shook as I grabbed the closest knife from the drawer. "Who's there?" My voice came out louder than I intended, reverberating off the walls. No response, just the sound of footsteps, which were now stopped on the other side of the door. I knew I needed to look, but every fibre in my body was begging me not to. Dragging my feet, I reached the door. I put my eye on the peephole, afraid of what I might find. Nothing. The hallway was empty, so I felt it. The bag behind me. When I turned around, I was no longer on the ground. It was on the table, open. The dark, indistinguishable contents pulsed, as if alive, calling my name. That was when the first knock on the door sounded, loud and insistent, and my vision went dark for an instant. Whatever was outside or inside was no longer just waiting. It was invading. The knock reverberated through the flat like thunder. It wasn't the kind of sound someone makes when knocking on an ordinary door. It was heavy, rhythmic, as if iron fists were trying to break down the wood. My body froze, but my heart raced, each beat accompanying that monstrous sound. The bag on the table seemed to laugh at me, its contents pulsing as if it had a heart of its own. The strange smell emanating from it began to take over the flat, a mixture of rusty metal and rotting flesh. I wanted to run away from the place, but the invisible weight of what lay beyond the door kept me pinned to the floor. There was another knock, louder now, almost ripping the door off its hinges. The air became even heavier, and a feeling of nausea rose in my stomach. The voice inside me, which had previously told me not to open the bag, was now shouting at me not to go near the door. "Stay where you are," it seemed to say. "Don't let it in." But there was something insidious in the silence between the knocks. It was as if something, or someone, was whispering through the walls. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to organize my thoughts, but when I opened them, the light in the flat seemed even dimmer, the outlines of things dissolving into shadows. "Open up!" The word echoed in the air like a command. It was impossible to say where it came from, but it seemed to be everywhere. Inside my head, beside me, behind me. I took an involuntary step towards the door, as if I were being pulled. My hand reached for the lock, and at that instant there was another knock. This time, the door really shook, the latch rattling as if it was going to burst. What was there was no longer human. It couldn't be. "Open up." The word came again, more insistent, as if it had taken shape. But I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside the door or from the bag. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Absolute silence took over the flat. It was more terrifying than the knocks. Slowly, I turned to look at the bag. It was closed again, but something was wrong. Whatever was inside it was now emitting a low, continuous sound like breathing. The doorbell rang. The simplicity of the sound, so banal, caught me off guard. It was almost comical, but the terror returned just as quickly. Who, or what, rings the doorbell after almost breaking in. My legs were wobbly when I got close, this time avoiding the peephole. But I needed to see. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door and opened it just a centimetre, enough to peek into the corridor. The corridor was empty. Completely empty, except for something on the floor. A letter. I picked up the envelope, closing the door behind me with almost desperate speed. The paper was yellowed with a rough texture, and my name was handwritten in twisted letters that seemed to dance on the paper. I opened the envelope. There was a single sheet inside with a message written in red ink. You let yourself in. Felt the ground shake beneath my feet. I dropped the paper, but before I could react, I heard the sound of something moving in the flat. The bag, now open again, was empty, and the thing that had previously been inside it was standing in front of me. The creature in front of me was a stain on the fabric of reality, something that seemed to be made of everything that is wrong in the world. It had no face, but its outline flickered, as if it were constantly forming and breaking apart, a living shadow covered by translucent, pulsating skin. The smell of rot intensified, making my eyes sting. I was paralyzed. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run, but it was impossible. The thing moved towards me, sliding across the floor without making a sound. There were no feet, just a deformed extension that seemed to grow and retract like a giant lung. You called me, said the voice, but it didn't come from any mouth. It came from inside my mind, reverberating like an echo. It was the same voice that had once whispered for me to open the door, but now it was complete, full of something ancient and hungry. I didn't call anyone. My voice came out louder than I expected, a desperate attempt to control the situation, but it sounded insignificant in the emptiness that the thing exuded. You opened the space. The thing continued to advance, and I backed up until my back hit the wall, and now the space is mine. Suddenly, the flat began to change. The walls began to melt, not like ice in the sun, but like meat melting over a slow fire. The texture of reality distorted. The contours of the furniture dissolved into liquid, shadows that dripped to the floor. I tried to look away, but something compelled me to keep staring at the creature. It bent over me, and in that instant, I saw everything. I saw a world beyond this one, made of darkness and screams. I saw human forms walking in a desert of bones, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal horror. I saw eyes, hundreds of them watching from every angle, hungry. My whole body began to tremble as if it were about to fall apart. What do you want? I managed to mutter, my voice now no more than a thread of air. The creature laughed. It wasn't an ordinary laugh, but something fragmented, like glass breaking into a million pieces. It's not about what I want, it said. It's about what you opened. You created the path. I just passed through. My mind spun, trying to understand. It was the bag. It was the damn bag. I should have ignored it, thrown it away, closed the door. But now it was too late. Suddenly, I felt a tug, as if something invisible was dragging me. The ground beneath my feet disappeared, and the emptiness began to swallow me up. The creature continued to stare at me, unmoving, as I was swallowed up by that other side, that place it had come from. welcome," whispered the voice before everything went dark. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe it's been minutes, maybe hours, or maybe eternity is the only time that exists here. I'm in a place where the sky is made of shadows and the ground screams with every step. Sometimes I see others. They don't speak, they don't react. They just wander like pieces of memory forgotten by God, and I wait. Because somehow I know I'm not the last. Someone will find the bag. Someone always does. If this story sent a shiver down your spine or left you looking suspiciously at the market bag, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your interaction helps to spread this dark mystery and keep the lights on around here. So, would you open the bag? Let me know in the comments.